Welcome back. Today we're going to provide the final lecture and discussion related to your formal speaking assignment that will be due in about 7 to 10 days. We're going to begin by talking about the kinds of scripts that you might use for formal presentation. We'll define them, describe their merits and their flaws, and then decide which is going to be best for our forthcoming assignment. So, let's begin with some general observations about presentation scripts, which we'll break down into 4 main types: the outline method, note cards, transcripts, and memorization. It might sound a little strange to place memorization on our list. After all, if your speech is memorized, technically you're not using a script, unless you consider that we define a script in formal speaking as any artifact that prompts or compels the reader. So, because a script has to exist in order for it to be memorized, we can consider memorization a type of script even if the artifact isn't present during the actual presentation. Typically, the choice of outline or script will depend upon your venue, and typically, the more formal your venue, the more formal the type of script you'll be using. Another consideration whenever you select the kind of script that's going to work best for your speech is your experience level. And placing a pin in that particular observation, it's just enough to say for now that usually the more experienced that you are, the more the formal type of script that you can use. No matter what type of script you do use, however, all scripts are designed to emulate conversational delivery. So whether you're speaking in front of 7 or 700 audience members, you can achieve characteristics such as rapport and integrity with your delivery. So, let's talk about word-for-word delivery. While you won't be using a word-for-word delivery script on your forthcoming assignment, it may be necessary to do so at some point in your future, particularly in especially formal venues. The method for that is to look down, absorb 2 or 3 lines, refocus on your audience, and then deliver those 2 or 3 lines. So as you might expect, usually word-for-word delivery transcripts are a lot shorter than you might think, especially for longer venues, because you're going to be spending some of your time pausing, looking down, and pausing, and then looking back up at your spectators. Usually lecterns or podiums will have enough room for you to slide your pages over instead of flipping them. That might seem like a quibble, but it's important to understand that if you are giving a transcript speech, then you're probably not going to be able to move around too much. In that respect, if you exhibit any anxiety or apprehension, your adrenaline's going to be kicking into overtime, and without too many physical outlets to put all of that extra cortisol, you're more likely to flip your pages right off your podium or lectern, causing you further embarrassment or exacerbating your apprehension. That's why, as I stated, most podiums or lecterns have enough room so that you can just slide those pages over. Also, whenever you print off your transcript, it's always a good idea to compose in large, double-spaced type. Typically, in large formal venues, you're going to be under artificial illumination, usually heavy stage lighting, and that will often mean that that lighting will blanch out everything that you see on your page unless you embolden it and make it very large type. Usually somewhere on the order of 14 to at least 16 type font is going to be appropriate. It's also a good idea to only frame the top 2/3 of your page. That way you don't have to dip your face down too much whenever you have to look at the next line. And of course, end every page with a complete sentence. That way you don't break off in the middle of a thought and end up creating a thought that you didn't mean to create. Here are just a few observations on word-for-word delivery. Number 1. Try to evade winging it during the delivery. In other words, just because you've typed up your presentation doesn't mean that you shouldn't provide adequate rehearsal time to refine and develop your overall delivery. And even if you do have everything that you're going to say recorded in front of you, it's never a bad idea to try to commit the first 15 to 30 seconds to memory. Remember, this is a clutch moment for your spectators and audience. It's the time that they are going to make adjudications or judgments about your integrity, credibility, and rapport. So making sure you can maintain eye contact with them during that period is absolutely essential to acceding to your speech goals. It's good to evade word-for-word delivery, if at all possible, if you're a novice or amateur speaker, and that leads to our final observation. Sometimes word-for-word deliveries or transcripts can create a false crutch. They can encourage an overall lack of rehearsal in the speaker, and that means that the delivery is probably going to sour the audience or spectators, so that no matter how credible the actual transcription, your integrity and rapport might suffer to such an extent that you're not able to achieve your goals within the context of the presentation. Now, one type of quotation that most of us are going to use, which is why we've spent the previous 2 slides discussing transcripts, are citations. So, for example, if you're going to directly quote one or more sources from your research in your presentation, it's a good rule to follow a few simple steps in citations. Number 1 is, of course, trying to avoid especially lengthy quotes, unless you are doing a word-for-word delivery speech. Generally, a porch that Goldilocks shows sides for citations tends to be about 2 or 3 lines. Anything shorter can be paraphrased, anything longer, and you probably need to consider breaking it up or shelving it for future opportunities. Alongside that, don't forget to cite the author and the publication. A good rule to follow is the more recent the publication, the more information you need to provide in your citation during your speech. For example, if you're just quoting a book from over a century ago, you can just say, Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities, quote, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times," end quote. But if you have decided to do your presentation on an especially hot-button issue, one that you're going to need to, for example, quote a Time magazine article from just a few weeks ago then by all means, list the author and list the specific publication date to the day. You might also list even the page number. That way, your audience will be more likely to check that information for themselves. Last but not least, find a way to designate the start and end of your quote, any manner so that your audience will know the difference between your words and the words of your research and evidence. The most common way to do that is just to say, quote, end quote. But some people use gestures, different intonations in their voice. Doesn't matter what you choose, so long as you choose something, and so long as you keep it consistent throughout the duration of your speech. Let's talk about outline delivery. This is the kind of delivery that you're going to be giving on your presentation because you're allowed to use index cards. Of course, remember, those index cards will follow the rule of 5, trying not to have more than 5 lines per index card and no more than 5 words per line. Here, you're able to just glance down, recall, and then expound or amplify upon that message to your audience, which, of course, allows for greater flexibility and spontaneity, especially if you can tell that your spectators aren't necessarily grasping a particular point, or if their feedback is showing you to embellish upon a point even further. The only problem with that is it can invite rambling or sloppy speaking, and thus, just like word-for-word delivery, compels the need for refinement and practice. And we've probably all seen at least one speech in our life where it didn't take too much to derail the overall presentation because of a proverbial rabbit trail. You may, for example, have had a professor or a secondary school instructor, and all you needed to do was ask them about a particular topic that was off topic to get them to ramble on and on and on for the rest of class. And, of course, the reason why we are wanting outline delivery instead of word-for-word delivery is it provides greater freedom of movement. In other words, you're going to have outlets for all the extra adrenaline through the use of gestures and steps during your presentation. Now, obviously you don't have to record everything you see here on this slide, but here are just a few tips for working on your script during the rehearsal process. Number 1, the best time to go over your script in your head is right before you go to bed every evening. This is because nothing else is going to complete for your memory space, and it's been shown that if you recall something or expound upon something just before sleeping, it's far more likely to enter your long-term memory. And it's never a bad idea to isolate or surgically remove any humorous anecdotes, narratives, or jokes in your speech. Practice telling them to people without the context of your speech just so you can practice things like comedic timing, delivery, etc. And it's never a bad idea to make a recon trip to your site. not necessarily as important in our presentation, because most of us are going to be giving our speeches either in our homes or in a classroom that we've given a speech several times. But if you ever have to give a professional presentation for your career or for another academic course, make sure you get there early. Try to practice your opening and your closing, just to hear what your voice is going to sound like in that space, so you won't have any sudden surprises when you start your speech. With that in mind, folks, we're going to watch a brief presentation right now. The following DAVA speaker is going to attempt to deliver an informative speech on a topic of personal wellness, and as we watch it together, I'd like you to try to identify the type of script this person is using, and then provide some constructive criticism in your mind. You can use diagnostic analysis to enhance your response.
Happy Buddha, downward dog, warrior. If someone was to tell you to do some of these things, you may think they were a little crazy, but I'm in fact just discussing a few of the different yoga poses. I've been practicing yoga for the past 4 years, and if it weren't for yoga, I too would hate Mondays, as I get to practice yoga every Monday morning. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to discuss the physical benefits, the mental benefits, and the ways that you can incorporate yoga into your daily life. To begin with, I'm going to start off with the physical benefits of yoga. As yoga is a great therapy for fatigued muscles, something that, according to the class survey, 75% of you have endured, it is a great way to relieve muscle tension, joint pain, and musculoskeletal imbalances. Musculoskeletal imbalances occur when you use the dominant side of your body over the other side, such as holding a bag on your right shoulder all day, or being an athlete that uses your left hand. In yoga, you balance every pose and posture in order to alleviate these imbalances. Also, because yoga prevents injuries and alleviates muscle pain, various athletes like to use yoga into their daily life, such athletes as LeBron James, Shaquille O'Neal, and the entire NFL Eagles team. Also, cancer patients are known to use yoga to lessen the nauseousness that they experience when undergoing chemotherapy treatments. According to the American Cancer Society website, article titled Yoga, published in May of 2008, there is evidence to suggest that yoga may be helpful when used with medical treatment to help relieve some of the symptoms linked to cancer, asthma, diabetes, drug addiction, high blood pressure, heart disease, and migraines. Also, this man right here is a veteran. His name is Arthur Borman, and he underwent major crippling to his knees and his back, and after 10 months of intensive yoga treatment, he was able to lose 110 pounds and not only walk unassisted, but to do headstands. A pretty tremendous feat brought to you by the power of yoga and some determination. Next, I'm going to discuss the mental benefits of yoga. As yoga is a stress stabilizer due to the breathing regimens that are incorporated into the practice, it is a great way to alleviate stress and lower your blood pressure. According to the Harvard Health publications of Harvard Health Med School, published in April of 2009, by reducing stress response systems, this in turn decreases physiological arousal. For example, reducing heart rate, lowering blood pressure, and easing respiration. Also, because yoga is a form of exercise, it is a mood enhancer and also a confidence booster that's brought to you in a judgment-free zone. Next, I'm going to discuss the different types of yoga that you can incorporate into your daily life. As yoga can be done by someone that is a limber, healthy 20-year-old, all the way to someone suffering arthritis at the age of 80, there are different variations of yoga in different styles. There is a hatha or vinyasa yoga, which is more slow-paced and really hones in on the breathing aspect of yoga, all the way to something more cardio-based, such as power yoga. But today I'm going to discuss with you a way that you can incorporate yoga into your daily life without having to warn anyone that you're about to do it. This is the breathing regimen. In order to do a yoga breath, you must breathe in slowly through your nostrils, filling your entire abdominal cavity, pausing, and then releasing that on an exhalation through your nostrils. This will help with stress and bring oxygen into the body. This is great for anticipating a speech or running a marathon. In conclusion, You now understand the physical benefits of yoga, the mental benefits of yoga, and ways that you too can incorporate yoga into your daily life. As I close this speech, I'm going to do so in the traditional yoga way that they end each class with, by clasping my hands over my heart chakra to signifying the divine flow, and closing with Namaste.
All right, folks, a couple of things that you probably noticed about this presentation. Even though the person was carrying an index card, it's pretty clear that this speech is virtually all memorized. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is this to the detriment or to the aplomb of the overall speech? While the aplomb of this speech is pretty evident, the fact that this person was able to maintain eye contact throughout the duration of the presentation, the fact that they were able to incorporate facial and gesture within the presentation itself, there are some moments, some clutch moments in the speech that are detrimented by the fact that they weren't able to refer to merely something that they could glance at, recall, and expound upon. And if they'd have had any negative feedback in this speech, if it hadn't been pre-recorded, if they needed to elaborate on a point, it's pretty clear they might not have been able to do that. Now, as I've already stated, there's no necessarily perfect script for you to use so long as it achieves a conversational speech delivery pattern. And oftentimes, there's no single best or worst. It's just an interval that you'll have to choose. But understanding what goes right and not so right with various transcripts or speaking styles can help you make the appropriate choice to exceed your speech goals during the next assignment. With that in mind, let's talk a little bit about the vocal inflections of a good speaker. Number one, you should be loud enough to be heard adequately in your space, and also have an adequate and varied rate of speech. One thing I'd like to spend a little time discussing is clear diction or articulation. Lots of times, especially when we don't have a large audience to speak to, we have a tendency to mix our words together. That makes it a lot harder to understand. One good trick that I always use is to put a very slim pen or even pencil about 2 or 3 teeth back in my mouth. This might help you do 2 things during your rehearsal process. Number one, it'll help you open your mouth wider to be heard by a larger array of audience members, and number 2, it will also cause you to slow down, since most problems related to diction are related to the rate of our speech. It's also never a bad idea to avoid too much sugar, as this can increase the amount of saliva in your mouth, and that can make it a little bit more difficult to pronounce any word that has more than 2 or 3 syllables. Of course, you want a pleasant pitch, and it's never a bad idea to also use frequent pauses during your speech as well. Usually the best time to use pauses is when you move between items, subpoints, or even main ideas. That way your audience knows even if they become momentarily distracted, they can refocus on your presentation and get an overall sense of the speech. Finally, let's discuss eye contact. You'll have to simulate eye contact if you're recording your speech and you only have about 3 or 4 audience members, but if you eventually need to speak in front of a larger group of people, it's never a bad idea to look at one member of the audience. It says here for about a minute, but that's for extremely formal considerations. Usually something more than 10 seconds is going to seem a little bit stocker eye contact, so I would cut it off at about 10 to 15 seconds. Turn your head slightly when you need to move to the next person, and include people from all over the room, especially those at the side of the room and near the front. We often think that we need to concentrate on the center of the room, but that's not true. Usually, if you're standing on the far right and you're looking at people in the front row on the far left, that does several things. Number one, people in the far right are not going to be distracted because you're standing right there. When you're looking at people on the far left, they're not going to be distracted either because you're looking at them. And even your audience members in the back of your performance venue are going to be able to see that you're actually making eye contact with those individuals. That's going to surrogate the relationship that you have with them and create greater rapport. All right, folks. That's all the time that we have for today. I'm looking forward to your responses to the next discussion journal, and as always, feel free to contact me if you have any questions about your forthcoming assignment. I've already answered a handful of emails, and I'm very excited about seeing what you have stored.